So good afternoon or good day, everyone. Let me, on behalf of Elsevier, welcome you to our Flash Science Talk series, this time focusing on how universities are contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are, of course, of increasing importance, not only as we see during this pandemic, but also due to the increasing extreme weather phenomena caused by climate change, affecting quite a lot also the country of our interviewee today, Australia. My name is Anders Karlsson from Elsevier's Global Strategic Networks team, and today we're very honored to be joined by Professor Duncan Ivison, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research at the University of Sydney, Australia. This is actually very exciting because the University of Sydney, a top global university, has a clear commitment to the SDGs, a clear strategy, and with very clear targets beyond this education and research and how it contributes, such as net zero emissions by 2030, zero waste to landfill by 2030, 30% reduction in potable water use by 2030, just a few examples. So welcome, Duncan. And can I ask you first to do a brief self-introduction as well as a brief intro to the University of Sydney?
Sure, Anders, welcome. Thanks very much for having me. Great that Elsevier has taken this initiative. I think it's a terrific opportunity to talk about these issues. So yeah, I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor here at the University of Sydney. I'm Canadian by origin, grew up in Montreal, Quebec, and did my undergraduate at McGill and my PhD then in London at the LSE, and then have been lucky enough to work in some pretty extraordinary institutions around the world, and eventually landed at the University of Sydney, where I'm a professor of political philosophy and now helping support research at the university. And Sydney's quite an interesting institution. It's Australia's first university. So we were the first university in the country, so over 170 years old. And we're a comprehensive university. Well, actually, one of the most comprehensive universities in the world, which makes my day job absolutely fascinating and challenging at the same time. So we literally teach and research across all the major disciplines, humanities, social sciences, life sciences, natural sciences, the creative arts. So it occupies a really unique position, I think, in not just Australia, but the region. And that really has informed our thinking about, I guess, our commitment to the SDGs and why we think it's important to, I guess, framing and thinking about the nature of the research and teaching we do.
So we see that the UN have urged everyone to accelerate the progress right now. We have 10 years to go, basically. So what role do you see universities and research institutions play in accelerating the progress? And basically, why should universities engage on the SDGs?
So that's a great question. I mean, I'll take the second one first. So why should universities contribute to accelerating the SDGs? Why should universities take the SDGs seriously? And I think fundamentally it comes down to really the expectation of the broader community that institutions like ours, comprehensive research-intensive universities, I think increasingly have a moral responsibility to harness our research and education capabilities to address issues which are really critical to without being too dramatic, the survival of the world. And we live on a very fragile continent in a very challenging part of the world. And we have experienced some of the extremes in the change of climate and some of the challenges facing the world over the past few years here in the Southern Hemisphere. So I think the primary reason for embracing the SDGs is we have an obligation and responsibility to do so. And I think the community increasingly expects us to. And so there's a kind of license to operate issue. The second reason, though, is I think our students and our staff and our alumni are deeply motivated to address these challenges and these issues. It excites our students, it excites our researchers and our educators, and I think our alumni are very motivated to see the university contributing. So I think there's a kind of internal motivation for doing so. So for that reason, I think at Sydney we've been really delighted to see the engagement from our staff and students and alumni in this whole initiative, but also, they're holding us accountable, so we're going to have to deliver, and that's going to be an interesting challenge. Look, in relation to the first question, I mean, what can universities do? I think we have to think differently about the way we harness our disciplines. I think we have to, although disciplinary depth is incredibly important and it's fundamental to a university, I think increasingly we have to think about how we bring our disciplines together in new ways to address these complex, multifaceted problems. Climate change will not be solved purely through technical solutions. It'll be very important to come up with, new batteries, new ways of preserving water, new ways of managing waste. But we're also going to have to change behavior. People are going to have to consume less, live differently. Even the nature of value might change. We might have to look at what we value in new ways. So I don't think there's never been a time more important than now to bring those cross-cutting engagements between the humanities and social sciences, the creative arts, and the natural, physical, and life sciences. And I think a university like ours that really does cross that breadth has a particular responsibility to do that. And I think that is really where the new work, new ideas, and breakthroughs will come through that can help us address the SDGs. At the same time, we, like every other organization, have to live more sustainably as well. So as you mentioned in your intro, we've got to reduce our energy footprint. We've got to reduce and improve how we consume water and how we operate as an institution, and walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
So thank you. You actually brought up an important question there around the interdisciplinary nature of the SDGs. Do you have any concrete examples from the University of Sydney on how you have addressed this?
Sure. So this has been a big part of our research strategy over the past 10 years, really. We created 8 whole of university initiatives that we call our multidisciplinary initiatives that address a critical, complex, multifaceted global and local problems. So chronic disease, in nanoscience and technology, in brain and mental health, in infectious diseases, interestingly enough, in Southeast Asian studies, China studies. So we have really tried for a while now to bring our disciplines together in new ways. And these are initiatives which really incentivize and encourage our researchers to work together on a particularly difficult set of problems. So for example, we have an initiative focused on obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, and the way these chronic diseases are interrelated, but also how they're a product not just of biomedical mechanisms and biomedical sort of phenomena, but also environmental phenomena. So how people eat and how people drink and their ability to get, appropriate amounts of sleep, etc., are not simply biomedical phenomena, but are actually impacted by the world they live in, the jobs they have, the availability of parks and places to exercise. So we've tried to take a sort of complex systems approach to many of these problems. Now, another example is, you might remember that back in last January, December, we suffered from horrific fires in Australia, some of the worst ever on this continent. It was absolutely devastating. And we were able to mobilize very quickly researchers, not just who work on fire ecology and issues in environmental ecology more generally, but economists, political scientists, even cultural theorists, as well as public health experts, and of course, experts in fire and environmental science, to try and tackle the emerging issues and help the government and regions and local towns and cities come up with both immediate solutions, but also already thinking about what the recovery looks like. Now, that's something I think that universities like ours are increasingly not only in a position to do, but are really expected to do. And that's something we really have embraced and feel very committed to doing.
So you actually come into the third question as well. We often speak about an academic ivory tower, that the discussion is between researchers, but the SDGs and the way you have been working is really to bridge into policy as well, bridge into the broader society. So is there any particular advice you could give or say that how this should be done in a successful way?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and we haven't completely figured it out. Like other universities, there are always challenges, and universities are very conservative institutions. So you have to be innovative, and you have to be looking at new ways of behaving. Look, I'd say there's three critical things. The first thing is the university has to really make it explicit that they value this kind of work. And that goes from the president right on down to the colleagues at the coalface. The institution has to say in a loud and clear voice, this is important to us. We want to contribute to this. We see work in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals as something that we value and that we want to enable happen. I think the second thing is we have to create structures that incentivize and enable this kind of work to happen in the first place. So I mentioned our multidisciplinary initiatives. That's been really important. We've created sort of new kinds of structures within the institution. They don't, sometimes it doesn't work right away. You have to keep tweaking it and adjusting it, but you need to create new kinds of institutions, new kinds of ways of working, and incentivize researchers to engage. And part of that is also sending a signal to our industry and community and government partners that we want to work with them, that it's not about us bringing them solutions, it's about listening and about us addressing the problems that they describe and are important to them, and creating an environment in which those genuine collaborative engagements can happen. It's not about us bringing knowledge from on high down to our partners. It's really about working together and being genuine partners. And then I think the third and final thing is to really ensure that people have the opportunity to develop the skills they need to do this work. And this is something we're really just starting to, I think, grapple with now. Academics are raised in a very particular way. We're raised to produce knowledge in a certain way. And we have to help, I think, our colleagues develop skills around collaboration. How do we share our work? How do we engage with communities in the right way? How do we think about the distribution of knowledge? And this is something that, I'm sure Elsevier is thinking about as well. How do we support our colleagues to develop these new skills, because they aren't necessarily the same skills that someone might have developed in doing a PhD, becoming a professor, and succeeding in academia. So those are some of the things we've been working on over the past few years.
You mentioned it very brilliantly in terms of mindset, incentives, and structures. And I think one of the topics we're interested in right now is around research cultures, also reward system, and not only the infrastructure would be the information system, for instance.
No, that's right. I mean, that's something I do in my current job as Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research. Sometimes when I talk to young researchers, they say, well, Duncan, this is great. I mean, we really want to contribute to this multidisciplinary agenda, and we're really passionate about contributing to the SDGs. But all the incentives in my discipline are to publish in certain kinds of journals and publish in a certain kind of way. And often multidisciplinary research is not perhaps as valued as much as other kinds of research. So I think Elsevier has a role to play there, as much as universities have a role to play in supporting staff to take risks, think differently, work with different kinds of people, maybe publish in a different way as well, and even think differently about what research outcomes are. I mean, maybe we shouldn't only think about journal articles and books. We should be thinking about the impact that people have in the community, and I'm a big supporter of that impact agenda as a result.
It's one of the things we're actually looking at quite a lot around the broader societal impact, and also quite a lot moving away only from this kind of, let's call it journal metrics.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned about a bit of the internal structures of the university and so on, how we work. If you, as a almost final question, if you can mention something about the local perspective around SDGs, community engagement, etc., but also these are global challenges. How do you as a university act on both to bring those two arenas together and act on both those two arenas?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So one practical thing we're doing is we have a network of global university partners. We have 15 to 20 universities who we work with globally on a regular basis. And we put the sustainable development goals at the heart of those global university partnerships. So we organize, along with all the normal things like workshops and all that stuff with our global partners, we're also thinking about programs that we can deliver together, both on the education side and on the research side. So one thing we've tried to do is really put the SDGs increasingly at the heart of our global partnerships and trying to find like-minded universities that we can learn from and who we can work with. I mean, just before Christmas, I was part of a really terrific SDG conference with University College London, with whom we have a partnership, and it was great to be able to share, the different ideas and different approaches that we've taken. I think the second thing we've tried to do is similarly with our industry partners. We're very fortunate to have really extraordinary global partners, whether that's people like Microsoft or GE and other very significant global industry partners. And we're increasingly finding that the SDG agenda is very relevant to them. They want to understand how they as a company can contribute to the SDGs, and they often see the university as a place where they can work with us and learn from us, but also we can learn from them. I mean, some of the extraordinary innovations that are emerging in nanoscale science and technology, for example, are quite extraordinary. Microsoft, for example, we have a partnership with them on quantum computing, and that might seem a bit distant from the SDGs, but just imagine what a quantum computer might enable us to do in terms of building a more sustainable world, that the additional compute power might deliver innovations that we can barely imagine now that will help us live in a more sustainable way. And then I guess the third thing is we're trying to be advocates for the SDGs in the global international community, whether it's our government and their engagement with international institutions, or we have a partnership with the OECD, for example. We're a knowledge partner with the OECD. How do we bring our commitment to the SDGs in our international institutional engagement? So those are some of the things we're doing. I mean, it's all emergent and much more work to do. We're also very engaged in our region. And you mentioned at the beginning that, in some cases, we're slipping back in relation to some of the SDG targets. And that's especially true in the Asia Pacific in terms of clean water and sanitation, for example, in terms of sustainable cities, in terms of some of the areas around work and education. We're actually seeing the Asia Pacific region slip back, and we have a responsibility, I think, to engage with our Asian partners and neighbors to address those really worrying developments.
That's very important that you mentioned that there are really challenges as well towards 2030 and beyond. We're almost out of time, but to end on a bit more positive note, can I ask you to perhaps for your fellow academics and also perhaps if there are policymakers listening or others, one small thing that they should do very concretely at their institutions as a step towards more excellence around engaging on the SDGs? Challenging question, perhaps, but
yeah, look, I mean, I'm a great believer. I have to say, I think the SDGs became a bit more real at Sydney when we got to grips with our own environmental footprint, when we had to ask ourselves, maybe we should travel less, maybe we should change the way our buildings work and the lights we use and the suppliers with whom we work. Maybe we need to think about our own approach to how we as an institution operate in a more sustainable way, because it'd be a bit rich to go off and be advocating for the SDGs if you weren't yourself in your daily life trying to do a better job on that front. So yeah, one thing I've learned is that really, I think, galvanized our community in really interesting ways, because we engaged our research community in getting them to help us think about how we could turn the university into a living laboratory. And in doing that, I think all of a sudden people met each other, they engaged, and that created, in many cases, a foundation for research programs and engagement in larger research projects that reached out into the rest of the country and into the region. So sometimes just looking at your own activities, your own organization, your own way of life can trigger bigger and bolder steps downstream.
So thank you. That's an excellent example of showing how to basically walk the talk, and what you have been doing is quite brilliant and quite great. And with that, I would like to thank you for this very interesting discussion on behalf of Elsevier, and hopefully we can all together support, as part of the ecosystem, the progress towards the SDGs and beyond. And Duncan, very much thank you for this interview, and again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Anders. It's been great to talk to you.